Great. So happy to welcome you to tonight's webinar, Helping Brains Thrive. The Prevention Alliance of Dane County is a collaborative effort of all of the prevention coalitions located throughout Dane County. And I just want to start tonight by thanking them all for helping host and coordinate and promote tonight's event. You see all of the logos there on the screen, but the African American Opioid Coalition, the Sun Prairie Wellness Coalition, Wanakee Cares, Cottage Grove Cares, Belleville Cares, Monona Cares, and McFarland Radar Coalition, Oregon Cares, and Stoughton Wellness Coalition. So appreciative of all of tonight's coalition hosts. And I'm going to stop sharing that screen. I have one video to show as an introduction to tonight's event, and then we will get the show on the road with our speaker. Technology, 1 second.
Age matters. The adolescent brain is way more vulnerable to drugs and alcohol than in adults. The earlier someone starts using substances, the greater their chances of developing an addiction are. 90% of people with a substance use disorder began using drugs and alcohol before the age of 18. 90%. So what does this mean? Age matters. Prevention is about delaying the onset of first use, pushing it back as long as possible, whether that's alcohol, tobacco, or marijuana, which are the most commonly used substances by teens. Early use of alcohol or drugs can greatly harm brain development and increases the risk of developing an addiction later in life. Protecting the brain during this time is vital, as the adolescent brain is rapidly developing, learning and changing all the time. The adolescent brain can learn a new language or an instrument much quicker than an adult's brain can. It can also be damaged way more easily than an adult's can. The brain continues to develop until a person is in their early to mid-20s, with the regions of the brain that control emotions and impulse control among the last to develop. So be smart. Protect your brain.
So just a quick video introduction for tonight's speaker, who I am so incredibly proud to welcome to the webinar tonight. If you have questions that come up during the conversation tonight, the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A box or the chat box. And at the end, we will make sure to ask our presenter all of your burning questions and get them answered for you. So with no further ado, thank you so much for being here. Drew, take it away. The show is all yours.
All right. Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Let me know that you can see this.
You've got it up just perfect.
Oh, good. All right. We're off to a wonderful start.
And your laser is working just fine.
Woo. All right. So helping brains thrive, the ages and stages of brain development, how substance use can impact the brain throughout. When I was originally making this slide, I apologize for not including everyone that was sponsoring this. I'm associated with Oregon Cares, so apologies for not including everyone. Our mission statement, leading a concerted community effort to prevent risky behaviors and support healthy, alcohol-free and drug-free choices in the Oregon School District. That mission statement, right away, whenever I see that or whenever I think about that, because I'm talking to the high school kids in health class in the high schools, right away I think of barriers that come up in trying to get this mission underway. And I would like to just put up one of these barriers right away up front that we all must overcome, and that's the clever marketing, the advertising. And one of the things I've been doing past couple of years is asking the high school students, I show them this image and say, what message should I get here? What are they trying to tell me? And I would just share with you that oftentimes what I get are something along these lines of drinking alcohol is exciting, cool, fun, part of friends having a good time together. It's a part of what you do to have a good time together. And some people will even go far as to say that drinking alcohol is sexy. And so this is, I think for me, one of the really striking things that in our coalition work that we have to overcome, and we have to somehow communicate to the teens, to the parents, the guardians, that there's a more important message, and it's the other side of the coin. And representative variations of the messages that we frequently encounter in our coalition work, some of which you just saw in that example video. Over 20 million Americans suffer from substance use disorder. 90% of them began using substances before the age of 18. Addiction is a disease for the vast majority of patients begins in childhood. During the ages of 10 to 19, the brain is rapidly changing. Research shows that 90% of people with a substance use disorder began using drugs and alcohol before the age of 18. And adults play a critical role in the adolescent decision to consume addictive substances. And so when I think about these two messages, these two contrasting ends of the spectrum, I personally, as a coalition member, as a parent, I'm frequently left wondering, but how do we understand and explain these messages of the brain development and the need for delaying and that age matters? Why should the teens listen? Why should they believe us? Why should naive parents and guardians listen and believe us when we try to get across these messages? And teens are looking at the adults in their lives who consume addictive substances, and the teens are being blitzed by these clever marketing. Why, the teens are saying, why is it okay for adults to consume but not for the teen? And when the teen asks, but did you consume as a teen? How should the parent, the guardian answer? How should they go about talking to the teens about these questions and these observations that the teens are making? Furthermore, I have talked to a lot of parents in the community. These questions raise doubts in their own minds of what they authentically should be considering and what should they be trying to come up with as answers. They consider these to be inquisitive challenges. Why should the parents, the guardians, even want to change the culture? So a question that I circle back to, is it possible to reconcile these questions, these viewpoints, with an understanding of the current neuroscience? We have to add the basic problem of time. Many of you are, willing to be here this evening and participate in this, but there are other people who say, well, I can't do that. I don't have enough time. So I think about it in a realistic way. The parents, the guardians, the teens, they don't have the time nor the desire to read complete scholarly research reports that present this topic. They need pithy, concise, applicable descriptions and understanding of what it is we're trying to get to them. So what I've been trying to do for the past couple of minutes is I want to set the stage. I really hope in the next 40, 50 minutes, I really hope that I have something for everyone that's here, everyone that listens to the recording. In some way, there's some part that resonates, that gets to you to help you and help others help themselves. Can we talk about brain development in a way that everyone can grasp the importance of delaying the consumption of addictive substances? Can we talk about in a way that everyone can grasp why addictive substance consumption before 20 to 25 is more problematic than after 21 to 25? Coming up with some ideas about how do we talk about this with our teens and why do we talk about this with our teens? What do we need to know and how do we address those very common questions and challenges that the teens bring up when talking about alcohol and other drugs of addiction? So, right away, brief introduction, some factual information up front. Yes, brain development during teenage years prepares the foundation for a mental, physical, and social health well-being for the rest of the adult life. We're going to equate this period of 10 to 21 years as a period of transition. And that, unfortunately, also represents a significant period of vulnerability. More damage is done to the developing brain than the adult brain when addictive substances are consumed. I hope to show you what I know about that or what I've put together. Adolescence is a time for major plasticity of those brain systems that regulate motivated behavior and cognition. And that's a crucial factual piece of information up front. It is important to understand some neurophysiology. We don't have to be neuroscientists, but we have to have some basic understanding to talk about in an intelligent way why substance use is harmful during these developmental transitions, during these periods of vulnerability. And the big question, why does the likelihood of substance use disorder dramatically increase the sooner a teenager consumes regularly or binges or abuses addictive substances? So again, trying to set the stage, put everything into context, get you all prepared for what's coming and motivated to listen and try to piece together, again, hopefully some part of this resonates and you can put together your own viewpoint and answers to questions. Our coalition, ambitious goals, continue to, I love this image, continue to be make science accessible and relatable to the typical parent or guardian in Oregon, in these other communities. Again, I apologize. I was thinking about the Oregon Cares Coalition. I now understand there's many coalitions here. So insert your location there. Make the science accessible and relatable to the typical teen. Make it clear what is known about brain development and the impact of addictive substances on teen brains. Make it clear how this information applies to the real world, the real-time lives in our locations, both the teen and the parent guardian, real-time, real world, real situations that are occurring. Provide answers to the most often asked questions, which oftentimes are the most difficult to answer without any prior thought or knowledge. So what I want to do is I want to start at the end, kind of a backwards design. Looking at this typical adult human brain, 21 to 25 years. Hopefully, this is the end point of healthy development, what we're looking at here, a representation of. And in this slide in particular, I want us to focus on that part of the brain that's closest to the skull, the cerebral cortex. It's about 3 millimeters thick. It's right underneath the skull bones. It's the gray matter. When we hear about using the gray cells or the gray matter, this is what it's referring to. We think of it as our seat of intelligence, that part of us that truly makes us a unique species on this planet. It has multiple lobes. Those multiple lobes include the frontal lobe. Now, that's really what was mentioned in that video at the beginning. What we like to focus on as the most important end goal at 21 to 25 is the development of that frontal lobe. This is where executive decisions are made. This is where interpretation and perception of what's occurring in us and around us is finalized. And we decide how to act, the frontal lobe. There's the parietal lobe. This is really important for receiving and processing information, a lot of sensory information on and about our bodies and from the environment. The parietal lobe, receive that information, process it, and then communicate to the frontal lobe this information that was received and processed. So again, we can make an executive decision. The occipital lobe, all the way at the back of your skull. Now that is important for the reception, the processing of visual information, and that'll be important in a couple of slides. So remember the occipital lobe at the back of the brain, important for reception, processing visual information. The temporal lobe on the sides, right near the ears, on the side of the head, very important for receiving, processing auditory information. And just underneath that, it's, interestingly enough, is your sensation of taste, right underneath that temporal lobe as well. Finally, we have to highlight, again, for slides coming, the cerebellum. This sits down towards the base of your skull, down towards the neck, beginning of your neck. The cerebellum is the region that's very important for coordinating the movement of our skeleton, our muscles that we contract in order to move ourselves throughout the environment. Cerebellum is very important for that coordinated movement. The medulla, I'm going to equate with the brainstem. Think of this as your life support systems. Most important, cardiovascular, so your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your breathing. This is all coming from the brainstem, the medulla oblongata. So now that I've introduced these lobes and these parts, I need to, again, give you a final message that Connections between these lobes are what's most critical, the connections. Signals don't just arrive at one part. They travel throughout the brain, they're processed, they're sent to other parts of the brain. There's a lot of communication that's happening here. And neurons are the cells. Neurons are the actual cells of the brain that are receiving, processing, and sending these informative signals, if you will. Now, what we need to do for tonight is we need to now go down a little bit deeper. We need to go underneath of that cerebral cortex, that outer layer, and we want to get towards the more mid to lower levels. And this area has several names. We're going to refer to it the classic name, the limbic system. Sometimes it's called the lizard brain because it's a lower brain, a more evolutionarily sooner derived structure, if you will. This limbic system of the brain, it has multiple components. And again, we don't need to memorize these. We're not going to be neuroscience. But what we need to understand is that this limbic system early on is what's so very important for the lives of our young people. Till the time they're about 8 to 10 years old, it's the limbic system is one of the most important structures of the brain, controlling the actions, controlling the lives of that little human being. It's in the limbic system that we have the learning and the memory. And what's stated by the biologist is that this is all about the young person learning how to survive so that eventually they can leave their parent, they can leave the nest. It's the seat of your emotions. That's how many people know the limbic system through the common press. They know it as the seat of emotions. And oftentimes it comes up talking to the high school students, you know, the need for emotions. Why do I need to feel bad? Why can't I just be happy all the time? Well, it turns out it's actually important to have emotions so that you can test out how you feel about things. This is really important for your adaptation to the environment, for your survival in the environment. So it's actually a very important part of our biology. It's all about appetite and visceral function. Again, independence. Learn what you like to eat and how to get it. Obviously, that was more important, you know, a long time ago, because now we just have to walk to quick trip. But and lastly, the limbic system is all about the integration for reproduction, which I'm very thankful that is a topic I do not have to cover with the high school health classes, and that's for the health teachers. I'm very glad that I don't need to go into that and all of the landmines that encompasses. Now, again, I started off by showing you the cerebral cortex with the multiple lobes, the idea that there's connections throughout. Now, this is a point where I'm going to have you participate. You don't have to participate out loud to the rest of us, just within yourself. I need you to answer this question for me. If I say to you, 2 plus 2 equals, say the answer on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I'll hear you. Well done. Most likely, you said that 2 plus 2 equals 4. And I need you to pause for a moment and just appreciate the wonderful complexity of what you did in that moment. You heard me say there were waves of sound pressure that came to your ear, and those waves of sound pressure were converted into electrical signals that arrived at the temporal lobe, and the temporal lobe processed that information, and in conjunction with the cerebral cortex, like the frontal lobe, and in conjunction with the limbic system where you have a memory, you recognize that 2 plus 2 is a mathematical representation of quantities. This is strictly a human construction. And you said, oh, 2 plus 2 is 4. I remember that. And then you chose to make the decision to answer and verbalize the word 4. You had to breathe in. You then had to exhale and push that air over your vocal cords. The vocal cords had to vibrate at a correct frequency for the sound of 4 to come out. Guys, that is just freaking awesome that we can do that. And I need you to appreciate it's all about the connections within the brain that makes all that possible. And as our teenagers are transitioning to adulthood, the size of their brain is not changing. That is completed about 8 to 10 years old, because that's when the size of the skull is officially determined. So the brain isn't going to get any bigger. But what is going to change in the teen years, the adolescent years, is the number of connections between the lobes, between the neurons, the cells. This is all about increasing the processing power. by increasing the processing power, you arrive at the behavioral maturity. So I hope now you're on board with this limbic system, the cerebral cortex, and the big concept, the big theme here is connections between everything. The problem that we face, both as parents, guardians, adults, and the teens, when the brain is developing, we can't feel it. We can't sense it. It is so hard to grasp this concept that our brain is dramatically changing over these couple of years of adolescence. That is just such a fundamentally difficult thing to envision, right? So what I want to share with you is my first real connection to this topic. This connection made it for me no longer an abstract idea. Yes, the brain is developing connections. Okay, fine. The neurons are reconnecting themselves. I'm increasing the processing power. Thanks. What does that mean? Here is where I came up with, okay, this is no longer an abstract idea. This is measurable real-time data and allows us to see consequences. What I'm going to share with you is something I've been working on since going to a seminar several years ago. And as I go through this, I want to state up front publicly, any errors and or incorrect interpretation of what I'm about to show you and talk to you about is mine, not the incredible researchers who are doing this incredibly powerful work. So put that up front. What it is based on is brain scans. And it is just so amazing to me. When I think even back as my own career as a scientist, going back, 1985, 1986, when brain scans were being developed, these images were so incredibly powerful to us. This was science fiction. The idea that you could look at a brain in real time and see it have the areas become more active when certain things were undertaken. This was unbelievable that we could do this. And then you fast forward, 27 years now? And now it is truly science fiction. The idea that with the current brain scans, they don't just scan one little area of the brain, they can scan 12, 13, 14 areas of the brain simultaneously with incredible resolution. This is science fiction. This is just downright scary that this is possible and that you can interpret what's going on from these images. What I want to share with you is the seminar that I went to that introduced me to this idea. Imagine this individual is having their brain scanned, and above them is this image plate. So right now it's blank. And what they say to the volunteer is, as you're looking at this image plate and you're lying there having your brain scanned, there's this pad down by your finger, your index finger, and they'll ask you if you're right or left-handed, and they'll put the pad on the appropriate dominant hand. And what they'll say to you is, as long as there's nothing on this image screen above you, don't tap your finger, and like the index finger, don't tap. But now, if you should see appearing on this screen above you, if you see a letter, and I chose J, because, frankly, I got tired with X. Everyone chooses X. So I went with J. I almost went with Q, but no, I went with X in the end. So if you see this letter on the screen, we want you, as soon as you see it, immediately tap your finger on this pad. And so they'll have you do this for a couple of minutes while you're laying there. They'll have you looking at the screen, and then the image appears, you tap your finger, and then it disappears, and you don't tap your finger, and then it appears and you tap your finger. So you learn how to do this. It's a pretty simple exercise. After a couple of minutes, they'll do this. They'll say, all right, volunteer, new rule. If the letter appears and it's circled, don't tap your finger. Now, I want you to think about the cognitive load this puts on you. You have just been trained this very simple task. If I see a letter, I'm going to tap my finger. I'm utilizing the occipital lobe. I'm utilizing the frontal lobe to make a decision. I'm using the cerebellum to use my finger to tap on this pad. I've learned how to do this, but now I have to make that further decision, further processing step. Ooh, wait, is it circled? Do I tap my finger, yes or no? This is an immensely clever thing that they were doing, and I think they're still doing it. So what was being done when I saw the seminar was that across the United States, they were collecting lots and lots of these brain scans while doing this game of a letter circled or not. And so they were doing this on control, healthy, non-addicted people of various age groups. They gathered together abusers. Now, abusers were not addicts. I think a way for you and I to think about abusers would be those teens that admit they binge drink on the weekends. You know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they do not consume any alcohol, but on the weekends, they binge drink. That would qualify for this as an abuser. And they also had addicts of various ages at discrete points. Some addicts that were out of recovery, some addicts that had not yet started recovery, etc. So they had addicts at several discrete points. And I want to remind you, they had these people getting their brain scanned. They're being shown a screen. That screen could be blank, don't tap your finger. It could be a letter, tap your finger. But if it's a circled letter, don't tap. So I hope this is all making sense to you, what's going on here. What's really the most important part of this is that they are simultaneously measuring activity in areas of the brain. For example, they can focus in on the occipital lobe. And when that image is shown on the screen, they can see the occipital lobe light up with more activity. When decisions are being made, particularly when they introduce the circled letter aspect, the frontal lobe regions will start to light up because now there's further cognitive processing that has to occur there. The cerebellum, if the person is going to tap their finger, there has to be the coordination of the muscles to tap the finger. So that area will light up. And again, just to extol the incredible science fiction of this, we are talking about areas of the brain lighting up with incredible resolution and in time scales, milliseconds, thousandths of a second. That's amazing. And yet they can do this regularly. What do the images, what do the measurements, what does all of this reveal? And connecting it to the theme tonight. It turns out you can define definitive patterns of brain activity, the circuits of activation. In comes the sensory information, it's processed. Then the interpretation occurs. Then a decision-making process occurs. Then motor, meaning muscle output, occurs. And you can reveal this in a classic sequence of events, a circuit with spatial resolution and time resolution. And I think one of those moments in your life when you're around a lot of seminars and a lot of speakers, there are those moments that you just stop taking notes or you stop processing because they say something that just so captivates you. And the individual at this point says that they are now thinking of what happens with addictive substances as generating new circuits within the brain, new patterns of activity that allow technicians to actually predict. They don't know anything about the individual. They're just looking at the brain data from these images and these measurements, and they can get pretty good predictions of who this person is. Is this a healthy, non-addicted brain? Is this an addicted brain? And that's amazing to me. And that's when I made this, okay, this is when it got real. Because if substance use disorder leads to brain patterns that you can measure in real time that are definitively different than healthy brains that are not exposed to addictive substances. All right, we are now talking about real-time, real-world observations. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is that they can also include error rates. So you got to know they set you up for this. As a volunteer, they'll show you a letter, you tap your finger, show you a letter, tap your finger, show you a letter, tap your finger, show you a letter, tap the finger, show you a letter that's circled, and you tap your finger. Oh, you weren't supposed to, that was an error. And they'll do that on purpose. They'll get you into the habit and then show you the circled letter and you just keep going with the habit. And so that's an error rate. And it turns out the error rates are very much correlated to where you are in terms of your brain health, your brain development. It's very remarkable how those error rates correlate. Also the reaction time as well. So if healthy brains, non-addicted brains, are measurably different than those in abusers and addicts, then this for me is a way for me to talk to the teens about brain development, a way in a real time, real world setting of, yeah, there's this abstract idea of these lobes and these neurons, and you can't censor and really get to any of this, but now you can, because we're talking about something we can measure. You're just tapping your finger, you know? And I do want to point out some of the changes in the addicts do appear reversible. Some changes are reversible, some are not. It really depends on the person. in terms of their addiction, the length of it, the duration, the severity. Some of the changes are reversible, some are not. What I like to do at this point when I'm talking to the teens in high school is I like to say to them, so given this, I'm asking you, I'm looking at you, what are you setting yourself up for? What is it that you want to do? The sooner you consume these addictive substances, the bigger your loss. And this is no longer an abstract idea, folks. This is something that we can measure in time. We can see on the screen. What do you want? And so oftentimes that does help in terms of getting teens to listen, I guess, to talk to me, to engage with me more than they would otherwise. Now, I'm hoping you're still with me. In fact, let's do that. Let's just pause for a moment. Sarah, have everyone that's here, are they with us, yes or no?
Let's see, folks in the chat box. Are you all awake? Still eating dinner? You're coming in with big guesses and exclamation points.
Awesome. All right. Excellent. All right. I'm motivated now. Because what I'm going to do is I want to do a deep dive with you. I want you to really grasp what's happening at a deeper level. We now appreciate how we can measure changes in the brain, and those changes are affected by the presence of addictive substances. But truly, when you get right down to it, brass tacks, what really is going on? I want a deeper, more illustrative understanding of exactly what's happening, why all these words thus far, setting the stage. Why are these things true? I want the tools necessary to convince everyone that these observations and conclusions, what we were just talking about in the brain scans, are true. I want to have answers for those tough questions that the teens ask, and we as parents, guardians, struggle to adequately answer. This image is the beginning of our deep dive. This is just, again, science fiction that they can do this histologically. This is a single neuronal cell from the cortex. In purple, everything in purple is one neuronal cell from the cortex. And it is just amazing how this is possible to see these individual cells, how they can track the growth of these cells. And in particular, I want you to notice, it almost looks like a tree, doesn't it? I want you to notice all these purple endings. All of these purple endings of this one cell, which are not only in the periphery here, but also three-dimensional. So coming into this plane of your screen and out of the plane of your screen. These are all connections that are going to be made to other neuronal cells in the cortex. And here is where our deep dive begins. It is the connections between the neuronal cells, and each neuronal cell has an unimaginable number of connections to other unimaginable number of cells. This image just so well captures that message. One neuron, one cell of the cortex talks to so many others through these connections at the end point where the purple stops. Where the purple stops is called a synapse. So neurons, individual cells, they communicate with other neurons, other cells at these junctions called synapse. These are the connection points. And in an artistic way, here we have three neurons that are communicating with each other. We can think of these as a circuit, an activatable circuit of information flow from neuron to neuron. And each one of these three neurons is going to communicate with the other neuron through these synapses, these junctions. It's across these synapses that we have chemicals, neurotransmitters, that are released. Now, you have some relationship with neurotransmitters from all the popular press and the media that we are bombarded with. When we hear advertisements for various pharmaceutical agents that we can consume that alter our serotonin levels or the dopamine levels, those are neurotransmitters. They are what is the chemical communication between neurons at these synapses. And really accessible point for all of us. If we were to have come into our presence someone who was inebriated, or someone that had consumed a very recognizable addictive substance. I don't want to negate all of them. I don't want to raise one above the other. But I think if a person is inebriated, there's a recognition of what drunk behavior looks like. If a person has consumed too much of a hallucinogenic of some kind, that would be recognizable. And what I'm telling you is all of those effects that you can ascribe to an addictive substance, it's because of what that drug, that addictive substance does at the synapse. How does it modify the neurotransmitters between the neurons? That's what causes all the short-term obvious symptoms of a person who's exhibiting behavior of being drunk, of being high, of hallucinating. It is all because of the synapses and the neurotransmitters, I'll use my laser pointer, right here, for instance, where this neuron communicates to the middle neuron, or down here where the middle neuron communicates to the last neuron in the circuit. These synapses, that's where these drugs act. That's how they induce the symptoms. What I'm trying to introduce to us and try to help us communicate to other people is that now there's also very well understood long-term effects at the synapses by these addictive substances on the neurotransmitters. The emerging picture of what's changing during adolescence. It is often said that the adolescent brain is pruning. It's reducing the number of synapses. Now, I don't deny that. That is a true statement. What I find unfortunate, it is equally important and not stressed enough, is that the brain neurons are also strengthening other synapses. Let's use this figure as an example to understand what I'm saying. Let's envision this middle neuron. Let me get rid of this text. This middle neuron, right now it has 1, 2, 3 synapses, 3 junctions on that lower neuron. Envision that in the adolescent brain, this connection between these 2 neurons is vital for survival. Whatever it is a vital piece of survival. Over a month, a year, 2 years, this part of the center neuron is going to bend down and make a 4th synapse, a 5th synapse. It's going to strengthen the connection between these 2 neurons because it's that important for survival. Now, imagine up here, this top neuron. Well, it only has, looks like 2 connections here, 2 synapses onto that middle neuron. Now let's envision that that's not so vital for survival. Yes, the top neuron needs to communicate to the middle neuron, but it's not critical for survival. This is where the pruning happens. Over the course of a month, a year, 2 years, instead of 2 synapses, 2 connections between these neurons, there's only going to be 1. One of them is going to be absorbed by the body. It's going to be pruned away. This is what's happening in the teen brain, the pruning and the strengthening, changing the number of synapses, the number of connections between the neurons. I'm hoping how you see this connects right to our observation of patterns of brain activity when you're looking at a screen and making a decision of whether or not that letter is circled and whether you're going to tap your finger or not. This deep dive also allows us to envision if while you are pruning, while you are strengthening synapses in the adolescent brain, which by the way, as they're pruning and strengthening, you cannot feel. You don't smell it, you don't taste it, you don't feel it, and yet it is inexorably occurring. What if you had addictive substances showing up? I just told you that addictive substances act at the synapses. They interfere with the neurotransmitter communication. Should we be so shocked to hear now that yes, the presence of addictive substances messes up the adolescent brain development because it's interfering with the synaptic pruning and the synaptic strength alterations. Think of it this way. If I have this developing brain in front of me and I'm looking at this 3 neurons, in fact, these 3 neurons might be a representation of 2 + 2 = 4. When you answered 4, you remembered that 2 + 2 is 4. It was these 3 neurons from your hippocampus that said, oh yeah, I know that was 4. It might be these 3 neurons right here activated as a circuit. What if you had addictive substances present when you were trying to make that learning, trying to make that memory? Well, now it's not going to work right if you don't have the addictive substances present. See what I'm saying? If you develop these synaptic connections in the presence of the addictive substance, that synapse is now reliant on the addictive substance to be present. You take it away, that synapse don't work so well. Do you see? For me, this is where I find I can talk to teens, I can talk to other parents, because with this imagery, with this idea, it makes complete logical, sequential sense of why those words are true, why the adolescent brain is so particularly vulnerable and sensitive to addictive substances. It is the process of pruning and altering, the strengthening, that is so vital to brain maturation. And you can see why it is so sensitive to drugs and alcohol right now. Teens, we need you to be all of you. The sooner you drink alcohol, for example, the more imperative the question, what exactly are you setting yourself up for? I ask them, what do you want? Do you want to be an athlete? Do you want to be an artist? Do you want to be a musician? Do you want to be in academics? If you want these things, you've got to consider carefully the effect of the addictive substances at the synapses, on the neurotransmitters of the neurons in the parts of the brain that are trying to develop activatable patterns. I love this analogy. I got this from someone in Sauk County. The teen saying, you drink and smoke, why can't I? Why is the legal drinking age 21? Think of the brain development in the teen as building this house. Look, when you're building this house, at the joints for the roof, the joints for the walls, you want to use structural material that is sound, that is going to make for good structure, good architecturally, engineeringly robust structure. If you're building this with some wood glue or some thumbtacks, that's not gonna last. That's not a robust structure, is it? And I think that's a great analogy for what the addictive substances do to the developing brain. Now, Cynthia DiCameli also came up with a really good analogy that I'm going to show you here and make another point with. The idea that, you know, when you pour the cement, while it's wet, if you have things tracking across it, that's going to be captured by that wet cement. And as long as the cement survives, that impression is going to be retained. What another wonderful analogy for how the addictive substances get into those synapses and alter the ability of neurons to communicate with neurons. The other thing I would say from here, just building off of that, the idea that some of the changes are reversible. You know, think about on the right of our screen here. This looks to me like some kind of bird, which is very small and light, made these impressions on the wet cement. That's not very deep, is it? And I can envision over the course of some years, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, depends on if it's the winter of Wisconsin, right? That layer of cement may get worn down, and that effect of the impression might be reversed. It might be removed, for lack of a better word. But think about over here on the left, these deep foot imprints into this cement. That's really deep an impression, and that's going to be there for the duration of the concrete's life. That might represent the alterations to the neurons, to the synapses, that's permanent, that's not reversible. So when I saw this imagery of this cement, it really occurred to me that, you know, this might be a representation of some things are reversible, some things are not. So now that I've hopefully given you the some imagery, some logistical, logical sequences of information to think about and talk about. We're going to give you now the text that has been accumulated over a couple of years now of research into this. Specifically, the typical brain through the ages and the stages. And I'm thinking about the brain as 8 to 10 years before adolescence starts. Then during those prime years of adolescence, 12 to 15. And finally, when you're getting to the adult stage of the brain, 21 to 25. Thinking about the brain as these 3 ages, these 3 stages. Here is the important text that we should be thinking about, that we should have a reading of. And let's make these slides available to everyone so that they can more properly read them slowly and digest them, for all pun intended. Typical brain. 8 to 10 years. What would I want to say about it? You know what? It's full-sized. That brain is full-sized at 8 to 10 years. The skull is full-sized. Those sutures in the cranium, they fused, and so the brain's not going to get any bigger now. What is going to happen in the years coming is development again through that synaptic pruning, the synaptic strengthening, which we want to happen in the absence of addictive substances. The limbic system, so very important at this point because of it's where the hippocampus is for memories. It's again where this young humans beings is trying to develop the skills to survive. What can go wrong? And what I found when I was searching the NIH databases, they talk a lot about nicotine. And that may be because of all the prevalence of vaping now that's becoming such a problem, and the teens that leave it lying around. And so an 8 to 10-year-old might have more access to that vaping product now. That's my surmisal. That's not a fact. But in any case, what can go wrong? Well, thinking about nicotine. Smoking during these early years impairs neurodevelopment of brain structures that regulate inhibitory control. Think there, the connection between the limbic system and the frontal lobe, that inhibitory control, your impulse control. It leads to increased impulsivity and inattention. Those of us that are in the school systems, are we seeing an uptick of these issues for our youngsters? Some people would say yes. And if it is true, is it because of things like increased availability of nicotine? It increases impulsive behavior, decreased attention in adulthood. Here's an important comment. Adolescent, but not adult, induces long-term social withdrawal and deficits in social cognition. This is again because of the fact that you're 21 to 25 years old, the brain is pretty much done cooking. It's done doing its synaptic pruning and strengthening. So that's why when the teen says, yes, but you smoke, you drink alcohol, why can't I? Well, my brain's done cooking and yours is still in the oven. So that's why. I don't mean to be glib. This is serious stuff, but you get my point, I hope. Okay, ultimate result. You have a dependency now, or a dependency that's developing. You have poor working memory. Your prefrontal cortex doesn't develop properly. These are all the things that can go wrong. Typical brain, 12 to 15, most crucial adolescent years of brain development. Again, the size change, that was completed long ago. What I've tried to show you, both through the brain scans and that data on a superficial level and then diving down deep into the neuronal level, is that it's all about the structural changes that's occurring there. The processing power is increasing, the behavioral changes, the behavioral maturity, less risky behavior is coming. So the brain status at this point, this is when the reward emotion centers really develop quickly. And it also explains why teens are so renowned for making impulsive choices. With this rapid enhancement of the reward emotion centers, they really need to test things. They really need to find out how things feel and how they make them feel. It's why they can be moody and so emotionally volatile. And they'll admit this about each other. They'll say, sometimes I look at my friends and I think, what in the world is wrong with you? Calm down. And my response is, well, they're supposed to be like that. That's how they're supposed to be developing. And again, with that prefrontal cortex really starting to develop the connections to the limbic system, you want to have that happen in the absence of the addictive substances. What can go wrong? So what can go wrong? I've divided up here into 3 slides because there was a multitude of information that really pursued 3 substances in particular. Again, using our metaphor of building our house with thumbtacks. There's a lot of information available through the NIH PubMed sites about the effects of nicotine. Again, I think this is because of the prevalence of the vaping products and the fact that, as an aside, if I may, when I was young, growing up, in the culture where I grew up, smoking was part and parcel. Smoking cigarettes was part and parcel of what you did. It was part of the culture. By the time you were 13, 14 years old, you had already tried cigarettes and most likely were smoking as a habit. And the thing that I remember most is if you were going to smoke cigarettes, you had to be committed to it, because that first cigarette is the worst experience of your life. You vomit, you're dizzy, you feel like you're going to cough your lungs up. It is just such an unpleasant experience. And it's a low dose of nicotine, so you really don't get that much of a buzz from it. If you're going to smoke, you have to be committed to it. With vaping products, the fact that these are nicotine salts now, these chemically derived nicotine that's much smoother and much more palatable to our airways and our nervous system, and it's such a high dose in the vaping products. Now, one time using the vaping and with the flavorings in it, my goodness, this is such a great thing. Of course I'm going to vape. Of course I'm going to consume this product. Again, it's downright scary what billion-dollar industry was able to figure out. Back to this. So what goes wrong with that adolescent brain? I wrote down some bullet points here again. Let's get these to everyone so they can look at them in a slow, considerate way, thinking about the e-cigarettes, the vaping, associated with a greater risk for subsequent initiation and continuation of cigarettes for other drugs of addiction, including alcohol, cocaine, other psychostimulants. There is a strong association between use of tobacco products, the anxiety, the depression. There's substantial evidence that a bidirectional association occurs between smoking, vaping, and depression. And I think that's a very important thing for us to consider in our coalition work. I need to click on this slide. There we go. The other, of course, very well-studied, well-documented, well-publicized things that go wrong is with the alcohol use. In particular, how the alcohol use can lead to learning and memory deficits. The visual, spatial functioning does not develop as well as it could otherwise. The attention span, withdrawal symptoms that can worsen the verbal and learning problems. The fact that alcohol can lead to marijuana and THC use. All of these things are so very well correlated and well connected to the developing brain and the importance of delaying the consumption of this alcohol, this THC. Again, thinking about binge drinking, one of the ways to think about abusers versus addicts. Binge drinking in adolescence, that can be a very big problem. A problem that is easily, not easily, I don't mean to say that. It can be measured in the surveys of our schools, of the county surveys. The binge drinking is occurring. Running low on time. Marijuana, THC, is the other well-documented, well-described, well-publicized bit of data and how it affects the brain status, this developing brain in our adolescents, in our teenagers. You get worsening performance on several cognitive domains. You have attention problems, memory problems, processing speed problems. Executive functioning by the age of 19 is impaired. So this can be harmful long-term. And, again, just as an aside, it is so instructional to me, so remarkable. If I Google TED Talks, TED, TED Talks, about marijuana and its legalization, sometimes I find myself more entranced by the comments that are occurring below. The rants that occur from people, you can almost hear them smashing the keyboard with their fingers, that they have consumed THC all of their lives since the time they were a teenager, and they are fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them, and that marijuana should be legalized. There's nothing wrong with it. It does not do any harm to anyone. And it's just so remarkable, because let's just say for a second, for that one person, it's true. Let's say that on any measurable scale, there's no noticeable difference. Let's grant them that. Okay, so that's one person out of, let's see, carry the 1 times 2, 7 billion. You see my point? Plus they're self-reporting. Of course they don't know whether or not they've been impaired. Okay, back to the slide at hand. There is some suggestion that cognitive domains are differentially impacted by marijuana, The attention, the declarative memory, the cognitive control can be particularly affected, meaning affecting their risky behavior. So here we are coming to the end, the adult brain, here we are. The changes to the neuron circuits are nearing completion. The connection strength among and between the brain regions, that is all pretty much done. You have the better impulse control, the decreased risk-taking. So what can we say about the brain status at this point? We can say, let me move this box, we can say that the prefrontal cortex is almost fully developed. The best possible development has occurred for understanding abstract concepts, the ability to weigh the risk and reward, to control impulses, to have logic-based decisions. That is all as it should be. That has developed in a healthy, typical way. Now, let's not deny that even as an adult, 21 to 25 and beyond, addictive substances, addiction occurs, and you're affecting the synapses. And when substance use disorder develops, you are going to have chronic impairment of higher order thinking, decision-making, critical thinking. What I'm saying is that there's still going to be impairment, there's going to be damage, but it's not as deleterious to that done at the younger age when the brain is developing, when it's rewiring itself. But let's not be naive. There is still significant damage that can occur to the adult brain. It's just deleterious in a more remarkable way to the younger brain, is what I would say. All right, I show that we are at 6:58. I did not get to alcohol as a model for what it does to synapses. And again, though we can take a couple of minutes and do that if you think that's best, Sarah, or we can stop and answer questions.
Let's ask the group. Those of you that are in attendance, feel free to chime in the chat box if you want to move to question and answers, or if you would like our presentation to continue for a few minutes before question and answer.
It'll be about 4 minutes of alcohol as a model.
Yeah, no, overwhelmingly, we're continuing and keep going. I think people are really interested.
Okay. All right, then let's just have alcohol as a model for what it's doing synaptically. I think it makes a really good, it really buttons this up for us. You are now acquainted with the idea of neurotransmitters, chemicals in the brain that allow the neurons to communicate with each other. Here I'm showing us two of neurotransmitters. GLUT is glutamate. That's excitatory. Many of us are well acquainted with glutamate. We didn't even know this. When we consume our coffee, our caffeinated beverage, we are activated. We are more awake. We are more cognitively processing things faster. That's because up in the brain, we have more glutamate. Caffeine leads to more glutamate. So glutamate is the accelerator. It's the activator neurotransmitter. Now, GABA, G-A-B-A, GABA, that's the inhibitor, the brake neurotransmitter in the brain. And what you have to appreciate is that in the brain, right now in all of us, there's a balance between the activation and the inhibition, the glutamate, the GABA. These things are in balance. The way that I want you to realize it's in balance, as you've been sitting, listening, and thinking, as you're sitting there, all of a sudden, your arm doesn't fly off to the side, or your leg doesn't start jittering about off to the side. That doesn't happen because there's a balance between excitation and inhibition, glutamate and GABA. What alcohol does, ETOH is alcohol, what that does is it removes the glutamate. It removes the accelerator and enhances the GABA. It makes the inhibitor a bigger influence. And this explains synaptically all the effects that you can attribute to inebriation. The fact that you get relaxation, sedation, anxiety reduction. It's why it's a painkiller. Some of us well recall that before there were these gels that you could rub on the gums of teething babies, my parents, they didn't have that. What they had was the bottle of bourbon in the cabinet. And so it's an anesthetic because it blocks glutamate. Glutamate is necessary for pain. In order to feel pain, you need glutamate. Well, if alcohol reduces glutamate, it reduces pain. It also explains the decreased cognitive ability, the impaired judgment. Now, one of the things that happens is some people, when I'm out in the community, some parents will say, yeah, but I was listening to you the other day and, you know, I don't understand how this can be because I had a really bad day. I was feeling tired and down. I had a few drinks and I felt up. I'm thinking alcohol is a stimulant, not a depressant. It is definitely a depressant. What happens is it's a depressant. It removes the glutamate, the activating neurotransmitter. What it does is it enhances your sense of pleasure, your serotonin and your dopamine. You are still being depressed by the ethanol, by the alcohol. The thing is, you just feel better about it. So it's not that you've been stimulated. You just feel better. You get a more heightened sense of pleasure from the serotonin and dopamine. Finally, I'm really glad to show you this because again, all of us, we need to be in the community. We need to be talking to people. We have all witnessed the community service campaigns, public service campaigns, which are all well-intentioned, but sometimes they don't come out as well as we had intended. There is one community public service campaign that is just spot on, so correct, and so accurate that we really, really need to stress this. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. We've got to make that clear to everyone, teens and adults alike, because I hope you appreciate now, in order to control your body, to have motor output, you require glutamate. And in the presence of alcohol, even a drink, 2 drinks, you have less glutamate. You are impairing your reaction time. You are impairing your processing speed to control the muscles of your body. That is undeniable and it is measurable. And now you can appreciate how one way that can be measured. We've got to get this out there. This also explains why some people may pass away from high dose alcohol. They stop breathing. Their skeletal muscle diaphragm, so important for breathing, stops being activated, and so they asphyxiate. So with that in mind, I'm going to just wrap it up. Please, if anything, apply what we've been going through tonight together in terms of especially our deep dive and this imagery of neurotransmitters and how things are altered at synapses. Here is one immediately applicable way. You change the synaptic function, the neurotransmitters, you change your ability to operate a vehicular mobile. And with that, let's take questions.
All right, I am going to go through and allow all of our participants, just kidding, let's see, it all moved, the ability to ask questions verbally. It's a small enough group, I think it's manageable. So if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself. I'm almost through the list.
And by the way, thank you for letting me do this. This was such a joy.
Oh my goodness, we are so glad to have you tonight. I felt like I was part of a college class and talking to a friend at the same time. So that's a really unique blend, and I really appreciate that. Both challenged intellectually and as a parent who just needs to know how to talk to my kids better about these topics.
Excellent.
Anybody have any questions? Feel free to unmute and ask. I will share the recording link tomorrow. Hopefully tomorrow everything will be posted, as well as a copy of your slides, Drew, if you would be willing to send them to me. I'm happy to send them out to everybody who registered for tonight's event.
And I'll attach them as a PDF. That way it'll be most accessible in most circumstances.
Perfect. That sounds great.
You're welcome.
There is a question in the chat box that asks about stimulants that are used to treat ADHD. So, addictive substance that can be abused, but also prescribed for care.
What a great question. It is honestly the one thing that I stumble the most on now, after all these years in talking to the health classes and talking to health teachers. It is still such a stumbling block. And I've been trying so very hard to come up with cogent things. And part of the problem is even the healthcare providers don't fully understand, the neuroscientists don't fully understand what's going on and why is it that, yes, you give a stimulant to a person who seems to be overstimulated. How does that enable a resolution or a mitigation of symptoms? So I'm going to try to give you an answer. But I need to say this as well, because this is so remarkable to me. Myself growing up, I was told by my neighbor that was a grade school teacher that if I had grown up in these ages instead of the 1960s, I would have been on it Ritalin. This would have been prescribed to me. I have classic symptoms. So I identify well. And one of the things that Robin Williams said in an interview many years ago that I found so remarkable, he said, you know, people know that at one point in my life, I was terribly addicted to cocaine. And you may think I was terribly addicted to cocaine for reasons of the pleasure, for the, the hedonistic aspect of it. But in fact, he will tell you that cocaine stimulant, when he took cocaine, it was the times in his life when his brain quieted and he could think, he could focus. And for me, that is so a remarkable statement. Here is a powerful stimulant that takes a person like Robin Williams that we all know and could watch just all over the place, would have a moment of quiet, a moment of focus. And in that backdrop, how I think about medicines and medications and stimulants that help with things like ADHD, we have to recognize that in those brains of those individuals, it is not the typical healthy pattern of connections that we were referring to tonight. That person has something unique in the synaptic connections, the neuronal roadmap, if you will, is unique in that individual. And I showed you in a slide just a moment ago how in all of us, there's this balance of glutamate and GABA. And you can imagine taking that simple imagery and multiply it by 2 million. You can imagine some of that glutamate activation is going to ultimately lead to activation of sedation circuitry. And in that person, by taking the stimulant medication, it does stimulate, but it leads to stimulation of neuronal paths that quiet the overactive regions. That's the best answer I have thus far in terms of how that could possibly make sense. I hope it's adequate.
Thanks. There's another question about the J exercise, the letter with the circle. Can one see the difference in answers between those who were defined as abusers or as addicted and those who weren't? Can the loss of IQ or something else be measured to see the effects of abuse or addiction? And thank you. Great presentation.
Well, great question. I'm going to do the last part first. You know, this business of IQ testing is so argumentative, and it's something we rely on. I'm in education. We rely on it as a marker, as an index. I'm reluctant to attach any, at least tonight in this context, anything with the IQ testing because of all of the weed beds that entails. To the first part, here's the quote that I remember so very well. At this seminar that I was at, the individual making the presentation said that their technicians that make these brain measurements day after day, they can be brought into a room and there on the table is nothing but the brain data, the images, the reaction times, the error rates, the patterns of activation, the timing of this. And they could say with great accuracy that this represents, that's a healthy brain activation pattern. That's a healthy brain right there. Yeah, the error rates, the interpretation, yep, that's healthy. This is clearly an addict. This is a person who is not doing very well because of the error rates, because of the lengthening of the processing times. Yes, there are data markers that clearly indicate this is an addicted brain. And then they said this. Oftentimes the technician would look at this data and say, well, now this one's a little confusing to me. Is this a recovering addict? Because, you know, this is kind of on the fence. I'm not really sure what to make of this one. As it turns out, that could be an abuser tending towards that downslope into addiction, or it could be a recovering addict. So long answer to a great question. Yes, it is possible, they say. Again, I've never done this personally. You can look at the brain imagery data and parse it into these buckets of healthy, not healthy, and in between. And the in between could be the abusers and the recovering addicts. Great question.
Another one came into the chat box. If you could just talk a little bit more about how that repeated use of substances can change the brain and lead to addiction.
Woo! Great question. Because this is the number one issue that I encounter in the community from both parents and teenagers. The teenagers say, all right, look, thanks for telling me all that. Okay, I understand. Look, so to be honest, last Saturday I drank 2 cans of beer. So I'm screwed. Am I done? I've altered my brain. I can't be everything I want to be. The parent will say, look, again, thank you for telling us this. I appreciate this, but okay, it was New Year's. I gave my teenager a glass of champagne. Did I just ruin them? Did I just make this impossible for them to be all they want to be? Here's the thing. No, they haven't. Those 2 cans of beer on Saturday for the teenager, that glass of champagne on New Year's, no. That didn't do anything to them short term. Here's the question that they're not considering. They are equating that one-time consumption, that glass of champagne, those 2 beers. They're saying, oh, that's permanent. One-time dose, you're done. No. Folks, what matters is what comes next. That's what matters. Yes, teenager, thank you for being honest. I really appreciate you sharing with me that you had 2 beers. So this weekend, are you going to do it again? Instead of 2, is it going to be 6? And is this weekend going to become next weekend, next week? That continual abuse, that continual binge drinking, that is what gets in the way of the neuronal development, not the one-time glass of champagne. It's what comes next. Yes, parent, you gave your child a glass of champagne. They were 16 years old. It was New Year's. Okay, I am not going to be mad at you. That's not a problem. But parent, what came next? Did you discover that in the next month your child was now consuming lots of alcohol regularly or not? It's always that point. What comes next? Because it has to be continual exposure to the addictive substance over a period of time. That's when you start messing with the brain development. And unfortunately, this is the moment in their lives when they are most susceptible. Oh man, I felt good. I didn't just feel good. I felt great. I have never felt that good before. And damn it, I want that again. That's when it becomes the problem. Great question.
Thank you. There is a new question in the chat box. What about caffeine?
Oh, this is a great group. I got to say, this is a great group. Caffeine. Oh my goodness. You know, there is so much contradictory reports out there. It's almost, you can find with caffeine, you can find anything you want to find if you go looking hard enough. So
there's also a request to not ruin coffee for some people. So
I just saw that blink at me. Good news, bad news. We're not going to ruin coffee for you. No. Good news. To really mess with your brain development, with your glutamate, neurotransmitter signaling, you have to get to such high levels of caffeine, so much coffee consumption or whatever substance it is that has caffeine, that oftentimes you first and foremost have a stoppage of consumption because of GI problems. You start having significant issues with your intestines. You start vomiting. Long about the time the caffeine is really going to become toxic to the neurons, that's about the time that you simply can't consume anymore because you're either running to the restroom with your intestines or you're vomiting. So that's the good news. It takes a lot to get to that point. Bad news. Yes, the caffeine is addictive. And, you know, the withdrawal symptoms, if you have your 2 cups of coffee a day, excellent. But if you take that away, then you notice that you don't have it. So it is an addictive substance, but its impact to our physiology, to our neurophysiology, is not well documented as being deleterious. Especially I'm speaking as an adult. Now for the teens, They are consuming a lot more addictive substances at higher doses. They are. Good news, bad news. Good news, again, to get to levels where it's really going to become a problem to neuronal development, they're long before that going to stop just because of gastrointestinal issues. Bad news, they are now putting alcohol into their caffeinated drinks. And now that's a real problem because you have a stimulant fighting pharmacologically with the depressant, and that can just lead to wanting even more consumption. So that really becomes a nasty cycle that scares the hell out of me, to be honest. But no, coffee is not ruined.
I appreciate that, so thanks.
You're welcome.
Well, I will share with folks that when you close out of tonight's webinar, you will get a 4-question survey just to get some feedback on tonight's event and get some feedback on potential future events that the coalitions can come together and bring to Dane County. So that being said, if you're interested in information about your local community coalition, feel free to email myself, Sarah Johnson with Public Health. I'm the one who you registered with. So any of the emails that came for the registration included my information. Feel free to email me and I would be happy to put you in contact with your community coalition leads. We have lots of thank yous in the chat box for you, Drew, and I will just, on behalf of all of the coalitions, thank you as well. To have such valuable expertise in our own backyards is invaluable to all of us as folks working in this field and always struggling with how to communicate such complicated things in accessible language and concepts. So really appreciate you tonight.
Well, thank you to everyone. Again, from my heart, this is so very important work that everyone is engaged in. And these are tough things to do. And I am so committed to those ambitious goals, making this accessible. I think we can, arrogantly, I think we can. I think this is a great starting point. So thank you everyone for coming. You stuck with us for long past 7, and I really appreciate that.
If you haven't gotten dinner, go get something to eat, and we will send out slides and links to everybody who joined and registered for tonight. So thank you all again, and thanks again, Drew.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.